Welcome, dear friends. I'm really grateful once again to have the opportunity to be here in this space with all of you. This is a continuation of our Uprooting Racism series that has been going on for, wow, I think 2 or 3 years at this point. And as part of this series, we started a mini series that is really looking at personal vignettes for dismantling racism. And so the goal of these series is really to explore with specific individuals how they began their path to race consciousness and explore the work that they have been doing and how they got there. And so this idea is really to start a conversation and then for the friends to then come in and ask more questions. Because oftentimes through my own personal work, there has been so many times where friends have shared that they don't really know where to start, right? And hopefully with this mini series, it will become more clear and evident that it's all about stepping up and taking the first step. And through baby steps, as we take steps, more and more confirmations come our way. We learn, we get back up, we try again, we learn, we get back up, we try again. And so I'm really excited to welcome Lee Moavenzadeh in our space today. She's always been a great inspiration and one of the people that I turn to often for guidance and support when I have questions or if I'm struggling with something. And so it really is an honor to welcome you into this space. And I just want to acknowledge that it takes a lot of vulnerability and courage for us to share our story, the vulnerable moments in our life that have spurred us on, that have tested us and helped us grow. And so I just want to thank you for your time and for your willingness to come and share your story with us. So welcome.
Thank you, Liz. And I was wondering, how long it would take before I got emotional, and you you got me there right away with those devotions. Oh my God. So thank you for that. Got that out of the way.
So what I would like us to do, and let me go ahead and I'm going to spotlight you, everybody can see us. All right, and so what I would like us to do first is maybe if you could share a little bit about your background and tell us something, related to race as to how you started.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also I did also want to thank you for, giving me yet another excuse to really reflect deeply on my experiences. It's been for me a year of deep reflection. The house asked us to spend this year in reflection on the last 25 in preparation for the next bit. So I have been doing quite a bit of that, but this was particularly rich process for me. So I actually would like to start out with just kind of honoring this space and this moment in history where we find ourselves, to invite everyone to just kind of pause for a sec and reflect as well. And maybe just call to mind a moment of confusion or struggle or clarity or something, particularly meaningful for you around this country, our community in particular, our struggle with issues of race. And then I guess by way of a slight disclaimer, I'm going to share my screen, Liz, if I can.
Yes.
Oh, it says it's disabled.
Hold on one second. Let me make you co-host. Oh, there we go. I had your other one as co-host.
Let's see. So I had the bounty of participating last year in the Wilmette Institute course on anti-Black racism. And for me, one of the most powerful exercises we did was explore this notion of positionality. And so as an introduction to myself, I kind of created this, this art piece that shows, you know, kind of my thumbprint on the left there. It was all the sort of things that I felt go into, you know, my own sort of personal DNA and have made me, you know, brought me to this moment here where I find myself, and have influenced the way I look out upon the world. And there's a lot, right? And then the image on the right is sort of like what's obvious to folks as I walk through the world, right? I mean, so pretty much when folks see me, I mean, they can ascertain for the most part that, you know, I'm an older white woman and that's about it. And all the other things that go into making me are really invisible. And this was a powerful exercise because it really brought to mind this notion that's true for everyone. And so I walk through the world and I look at people and I see little to nothing of who they actually are. So it was a very humbling experience. And so by way of background, I wanted to start, I guess, just by sharing a little bit about my mom, who I'm named after. And she grew up in Mobile, Alabama, you know, in the 40s and 50s. So we can imagine, you know, that upbringing. Her father was a banker, so they were well off, and they had servants and stuff. She went to private school. And when I was 5, I guess we moved to Syracuse, New York. We were a military family. My dad was in the Army, and sort of both her and I, our first moments of awareness with race came in Syracuse. And my dad was there as a student, and so we lived in kind of a poorer area of town. And my mom had shared with me, you know, she was so she's probably like 25, 26 at this time. And she was laying out in the backyard, you know, sun tanning and, you know, with her eyes closed. And all of a sudden she felt this light touch on her arm that kind of startled her awake. And she looked up, and there was a young Black girl who lived across the street, who was standing next to her, just with her hand ever so lightly on my mom's arm. And she was like, "Oh, you know, hello there. You know, what are you up to?" And the little girl just said, "You know, I'm so sorry, but I've never felt white skin before." And for my mom, I imagine it was probably, you know, one of her first moments of actual intimacy with a Black person as well. And I just think, you know, I've heard stories, and I think back of you know, her own journey, I was in kindergarten at this time, and I went to a private Catholic little kindergarten down the street. And I developed a very close friendship with a young boy in kindergarten. His name was George Washington. And we just became best of friends. And I got invited to his birthday party. My mom drove me over there, and actually George lived in, I think what folks referred to back then, as the projects over in Syracuse, and mother drove me over, me and my sister. And when we knocked on the door, and his mom, I don't remember much, but when his mom opened the door and saw this little white girl standing there, with present in hand, her jaw, she was like, didn't understand what was going on, because she knew that George had a best friend from school whose name was Lee. And I assumed she thought I was not only a boy, but definitely not white. But she welcomed me so warmly into the party, and even invited my sister to stay at the party. And, so my mom, left us both there for this birthday party. And anyway, I just think there's, I share that as a way of sort of honoring and recognizing the strength of my own mother's, journey, and her willingness to be open and learn, and to kind of disregard her own social upbringing and the messages that must have played in her head.
Thank you so much, Lee, for sharing this very touching part of your childhood. And I was wondering, as we've been talking in the last couple of weeks about this presentation, you mentioned a concept that you called threshold moments. And I was wondering if you could just share the concept with the friends and talk a little bit about what that represents to you.
Yes. And also, before I leave this slide, I want to just show, so these are my mom's parents, her adopted parents here on the right. When I was 7 and my sister was about 5, we were visiting them, and she actually, stood up to them in a intimate family situation, and basically told them that if they didn't watch their language, that she was going to leave, and we were not going to come back and visit, because her young daughters were hearing what they were saying, and she did not want them exposed to that kind of attitude. So again, just another moment of strength. So for me, these thresholds, I kind of think about it, they're from a scientific kind of point of view. There's moments when possibilities open up, right? Certain things align, and a possibility for immense growth or transformation is available to us. And so when I was reflecting on this, I thought about, what are those kind of threshold moments around my own journey with race that really catapulted me to a new level of understanding and awareness. And while this looks, like a linear, kind of step thing, it really is probably more like a scatter plot, where at first there's a few little events here and there, just few and far between. And then as I became more and more aware, they get closer, they come, in groups, sometimes they're more intense, so it's not quite this steady thing, but it's more scattershot. But that's how I think about my journey, is this sort of, I've had some critical threshold moments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so as you were sharing just recently about these moments of awareness, could you maybe share with us the first time that you became aware of friends of color in a very deep way?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we were, military family and moved a lot. And looking back at my pictures, I know I was in my childhood, I know I was at least, outwardly nice and kind to people. I had, um, friends who were, or actually, I probably can't say I had friends. I knew people. There were people in my life who were Black, right? But by and large, my life was very white, and definitely my friend circle. So it can see here. Sorry. This is me in when we lived in Virginia in the late 70s with a little group of spend the night. So I was friendly, but my intimate circle was very, very white. And it was interesting because reflecting on this, my sister had a very different experience, because when we were in Virginia, she actually was bused into Newport News to a predominantly Black school. She had a very different experience in Virginia. We've had some memory conflict, but it was in the move from Virginia to Alabama when I was in high school. And I was born in Alabama. I'm from Alabama, but for some reason, this move really was kind of a threshold moment, because I started getting a lot of teasing about moving to Alabama. And, just all the sort of stereotypes, the prejudices come out, you start to hear awful things. And it was strange, because actually it was when I went to Alabama, there was the first place I actually was in a community of people, of very diverse people, and developed my first intimate friendships with people who were Black, and we're still, this here is our little powder puff football team. You can see our coaches and the girls who played, and we're still actually, here's our most recent reunion photo. It was still a very diverse group of humans who have actually grown to love each other even more. And every reunion we have conversations about race, and we talk about what a bounty it was to have grown up together and to have had an experience that was not like probably many people's experience of race, especially being, in a small Alabama town. So that's been a huge moment, both dealing with, kind of the noise in my head around the stereotypes, and then the dissonance that was created with my own lived experience of being from Alabama and living in Alabama, and learning to love a much wider variety of people.
That's so beautiful. And so I was wondering, as your race consciousness began to evolve, at what point, what was that critical moment where you shifted from awareness to action?
Well, yeah, so I probably had I had a fairly kind of I was an atheist. I had a fairly kind of rebellious personality. I liked causing trouble, so I would take, I did take, some actions. There were some events, actually I won't go into deep, but my friend Des here on the left, who I met through lacrosse, he and I had an experience in rural South Carolina. And this is my friend Ayoka. On the right, we were going to a youth service conference in New Orleans, and we stopped for gas late night in rural Alabama. And this is us, kind of taking a thumbing our nose photo in front of the rebel flag they had on display. And, so I would do things like that, but really in reflecting on it, they were largely sort of performative acts of, defiance, against racism, and but it wasn't until my friendship with this young man that I was spurred into action. And this is Kevin Howell. We were at NC State. He was the first African-American student body president elected at NC State. This was 1988, 1987. And he and I were both political science majors, and we had gotten to know each other in an upper level political science class. I was on the student senate. We did a lot of activism. We protested and organized on campus to get NC State to recognize MLK holiday, things like that. And he was being interviewed by the student newspaper this evening, and I can't remember exactly why I was there, why I was going along with him, but I learned a lot listening to him tell his story to the newspaper, about his journey. And after the reporter and the photographer, left, we stayed there, and we were having dinner, and I must have said something to him about just how appreciative I was for his friendship, because and how much I had learned about who he was in that process. And he kind of sat back a little and looked at me, and it was like, "Oh, are we friends?" I was like, I don't know. I thought we were. And he said, "Well, you're friendly, and you're nice. And we do, we take do a lot of organizing stuff together, but I don't know if, when you're not around me, and when you're hanging out, with just your white friends, are you my friend then? Like, do you have my back when I'm not around?" And it really, really put me on the spot. And I'm so grateful that he challenged me in that way. And he let me stay uncomfortable about it, right, for a while. And that's kind of what spurred me into my first, intimate, kind of risky action that wasn't just, outward, performative. And that is where, and I remember so starkly, I was hanging out, as we did with my group of intimate friends, which were all white, right? At a bar, playing pool. And there was one friend in particular who always told a lot of what we would now, refer to as inappropriate. They were inappropriate back then, but, again, just sort of lived a life of relative obliviousness, right? When I was in an all white crowd, you don't see those things. I didn't. And so he told a racial joke, and I remember literally shaking and probably crying, and my voice, weak and stammering, but I managed to very meekly utter out, "I don't like that kind of humor. Please don't say those jokes around me." And that was all I could muster to say. And again, of course, he, teased me immensely. I'm sure everybody laughed at me, thought that was just so cute and ridiculous. But this continued. And I remember every time it got a little easier. And, but I did make sure to say something every time. And then finally, after probably months of this, this young man began self-censoring. I noticed that all of a sudden he was saying things like, oh, I can't tell that joke. Lee's here. She'll get offended. And he would still kind of chuckle it away, but he did self-censor and it stopped. And that was my very first little intimate action, personal action that I took.
Mm, mm. Wow, that's deep, and I really am grateful that you shared that experience, because it's in those little moments that we gain courage, and the courage builds with practice. And so thank you for sharing that. So as you were beginning to take action, your race consciousness, I mean, even to today, is still growing and evolving. At what point did you shift from, well, maybe not shift from action, but at what point did you realize that you needed to center and listen to the experiences of people of color in a different way than you had in the past?
Yeah, so I, a couple years after this experience at NC State, I was part of a group called the Institute of Political Leadership in North Carolina. Their goal was to train people in how to run for office in a more professional way, but ultimately to bring a diverse group of folks together from around North Carolina, so that you were in contact with folks of all ages and cultural backgrounds, and Republican and Democrat, and and throw us together in this intense learning experience, so that we could develop friendships, and so that when you did get in office, you were a little more open-minded, and could reach across the aisle easier. So it was a very diverse group. These are some of the wonderful human beings that I was in, and there were about 7 African-American participants in this room. And after we would do the training, we would get together one weekend a month at various locations around the state. And after our training, we would hang out and socialize in the evenings. And there was one evening we're just in one of the hotel rooms, one of the hospitality suites, having snacks and talking. And as it got later and later, the room, it was pretty much just myself and this older gentleman, Gary Jackson, and about 5 of the African-American participants in the room, and the conversation turned to race. And they started talking about, their experiences in a way that I hadn't, heard people being, very sort of bluntly honest about their lived experience as a Black person in North Carolina. And then they started talking about white people and their lived experience with white people, and it was not so pleasant. And, again, I was young and brash, sort of rebellious nature, and I got very offended and hurt. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting right here in the room, and is this what you think of me, and blah blah blah, and how can you say this, and why would you say this? And again, to their credit, I'm just so grateful that they didn't just leave my little obnoxious butt in that room alone, but actually stayed, and helped me work through this, basically saying, it's just, if it's not about you, if that we're not talking about you, then don't take it personally. It's not, but we can't, it's just not effective for us to be like, oh, white people are so controlling, except for Lee, or except for Gary, there's just, you just have to know that there's certain things we have to communicate about our experience that aren't necessarily directed at you personally, and just don't take it personal. And again, it was much more eloquent than that, but that was sort of the gist of the thing. And again, it was such a gift, a loving gift of both insight, as I listened to their own stories, what they were experiencing, as well as sort of a a gift of imposed humility, right? That that I began at that point to try at least to listen from a place of detachment and humility, not always successfully, but that was the beginning of at least trying.
That is a very powerful moment in the shift to realizing that maybe our perceptions and the way ideology has influenced us changes the way that we perceive things and our experiences when compared to friends and PODIs. And so I'm just wondering, thinking about white ideology and this idea of social programming, how, at what point, and I know that there's maybe not one specific moment, of course, where you realize that you've been programmed socially in a specific way to perceive things and to believe things, but how have you, in your own personal life, how have you become aware of it? And then also, how have you dealt with trying to reprogram and reteach yourself and evolve in your race consciousness? And I just wanted to remind the friends that, the stories that Lee is sharing happened over years, right? Over decades. And this is a path that we're all on, and we all have these critical threshold moments that spur us in some way in our lives. And we realize, oh, wow, this is different. This is not at all what I thought it was, and so I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah. Well, for me, I moved shortly after this to Durham for a job, and I was at a political activist gathering where they were bemoaning how few young people seemed to care, right? And I was in the back of the room, and I look across the way, and there was another young woman in the back of the room, and we kind of looked at each other like, whoa, who are we? Like, we're young, we're here. And I was really thankful. So we connected there and began a journey of very intimate friendship and with a young woman. Her name was Linda Sheely. This is her here. And she was a community organizer with North Carolinians Against Racist and Religious Violence. So she introduced me to this group, and I became immediately involved with her and the executive director, Christina Davis McCoy. And that was quite both, there's the internal educational process of confronting my own programming, and the external education process of realizing just how bad it is, out there. And so we monitored, hate violence in North Carolina. So we compiled these yearly reports of all the bigoted and violent incidents that had happened in North Carolina. And there were a lot, this is on the right here. This is me sort of in disguise. Because we would go, I would be sent out to these different, we would get wind of a Klan rally or different white supremacist groups that were holding meetings in hotels, in various places. And we'd drive there, and I would walk around the parking lot and take down license plate numbers as we were trying to track, folks and basically, investigating sort of what they were up to and who's involved. So it was a lot of external awareness that I was learning about the legal and social history of injustice and racism in North Carolina and across the country. But then personally, Linda and I became best friends. And we did a lot of work together. We did these teen summits, we were around each other a lot. Spending night in each other's homes, just a lot of intimate association. We were having dinner one night. I remember just sitting in this this restaurant. Well, a lot of my stories revolve around food, don't they? And I don't even know what we're talking about. It was just sort of innocent. And all of a sudden I look across at Linda, and this voice in my head pops up, very, very concerned voice, right? Says, "Oh my gosh, Linda's Black." and it, kind of took me aback to hear, this sort of self-talk. And I thought, oh, okay. I knew that, but then I couldn't quite understand, like, why does that, why would my head say that? Why would that voice pop up? And when we were doing these teen summits, we were doing a lot of race work, and talking a lot about unpacking your invisible knapsack, this sort of stuff that you carry around that sometimes you're not quite sure of. And this, but it always had this analogy of, oh, I unpack it, I see it, and I sort of put it aside, and it's not part of my knapsack anymore. Well, when this voice popped into my head, and I felt really ashamed, right, for even just having that thought, right? Because, like, why should it matter? And haven't I certainly done, enough work and proven myself, right, to not worry about those things? Why is my brain still hanging on to this stuff? And that's what helped me understand this notion of really, it's less an invisible knapsack that I put, but more like these tapes that play in your head, right? And sort of like you can hear a song that you loved as a child and that you haven't heard in 30 years, and all of a sudden you're singing along and you remember the words, and you're like, whoa, this is, how do I still know this? This is wild. Well, it's the same, I realized, for myself at least, it's the same with this kind of racial programming and the stereotypes, and this is what makes the culture of white supremacy so insidious, is because it orients us and it programs us to believe certain things that then actually don't leave our head, even if we aren't thinking about it. It's still kind of in there and can get triggered in these random moments. And again, that's a whole nother scatter plot of activities, but at least I was appreciative to be reminded that, like, this is a daily vigilance that I need to exert, that every time a little thought pops into my head, I need to meet it. I need to be open to it. Like, okay, I understand where you come from, but I'm not listening to you. I know you to be false. It's the same sort of thing, like, on an elevator, and, or walking down the street and someone you don't know, so the thoughts that pop into your head that say, oh, be careful, this person, poses a threat to you, you have to say, no, this person gives no indication whatsoever that they pose a threat to me. I'm not listening to you. Right. And so it's those, the more I found, the more I had those conversations in my head, trying, to silence those little tape recording things, the less often they began to pop up. But, I have to admit, I don't know, maybe my programming is really deep, or maybe I haven't done as much, but they still pop in my head. I've been working on it a while.
Yeah. The insidiousness of it. And I can't remember the exact quote from Shoghi Effendi that talks about how we need to be vigilant and continuously working against it. And so thinking about all of your experiences so far, from a political standpoint and from your background. And I'm wondering, at what point does spirituality come into the picture for you, coming from an atheist kind of, background, and thinking about even the social programming and maybe how spirituality has helped you in work more towards this race consciousness. So maybe if you can talk about that path to spirituality and who introduced you to the faith.
Yeah, so I had I went to this mental health. I was working in mental health, and I went to this mental health conference out in Texas, and Ramsey Clark, who was the former Attorney General under Johnson, was there giving the keynote. Civil rights icon. I was very excited to meet him, and at this point, I don't know if you can tell, I'm very politically and legally involved, right? It's sort of who I am. And he mentioned something in his keynote about how really the solution doesn't lie in the law or politics, right? Which basically he said, if justice isn't in the hearts of the people, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter what the law says. And, like we've passed, as many laws as we can, and we're still no better in many ways. We are, I don't mean we are better in some ways, but, and so that really threw me, because here my life's work is political, legal organizing, and, advocacy. And I really had to confront that. And then the bounty of working with NCARV was that it introduced me to another dear friend that maybe some of you will recognize, and that's Dr. Harvey McMurray, who served on the board of NCARV as well. And that's how actually, interestingly enough, I found out later that my dad had been introduced to the Baha'i faith when I was very young by Jean Andrews, who was a counselor, fairly a high level of service in the faith. And I won't go into the whole, it's a very long story, my declaration, but it was through my relationship with Harvey, who came and brought me to my first devotional gathering at Ella's house. And so it was through the patience and nurturing of Harvey and Ella and Miss Bendu, who's also over here, here, that began me on the spiritual component of my journey. And as you can imagine, I don't know, they had a lot of patience, a lot of patience with me and the kinds of questions I would ask. And yeah, the thing that really struck me was that, that they never in any way tried to convince me of anything. They just really accompanied me and walked me through, like, whoo, this is going to be tough for you, Lee. This is going to be hard for you to wrestle with. Good luck. We're here for you. We love you. And so that opened a whole new dimension to my journey, in really coming to understand and recognize that, that ultimately it's a moral question and not a legal social question. And maybe that's why we continue, anyway, there's a whole lot more to that story, but.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. So could you share with us maybe in the next few minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions, what are some critical threshold moments that you've experienced in the last few years? Because as you know, there's been a lot going on. And so maybe if you can share how your race consciousness has also continued to grow and increase during these last few years.
Okay, there is a lot. And I'm not going to go through, but I kind of did a little rabbit hole action here, in thinking about this, and started like, oh, and there's that, and so there's just so much activity and education and learning and being challenged by thought and people and being loved and nurtured by people. But for me, a key threshold moment in my journey was when Michael Brown was killed. And again, it wasn't the first, but it felt like before that, we had, when I met Linda, that was the year Rodney King was killed in LA, right? So a lot of my own personal journey, it ties into what's going on in the country, right? And we use those moments as opportunities to learn and grow and evolve. And so what was significant for me is after his tragic death, our National Spiritual Assembly immediately wrote this incredible message for that following feast. And at least for me, as a relatively newer Baha'i, it was the first time in my memory, I feel like I had been very aware and conscious and raising these issues in the Baha'i community, but didn't really have a sense, of our centering this issue right as a community. And then the National Spiritual Assembly writes this letter, beautifully centering, what's going on and our role. And they end it with this quote: "The American struggle is our struggle. We are one nation, one people." And I felt like that was a moment for our community to really begin dialoguing and looking, again, in various degrees of success. But then, okay, I won't go into that because that's going to be too, but I learned a lot from this amazing young man as well about, anyway, the depth of relationship that's required to make it through. And of course we had the beautiful guidance, just pour, this love in the form of letters and exhortations from both our National Spiritual Assembly and the Universal House of Justice just continued to pour out on us, which has been a beautiful support. Okay, gosh, there's just so much. And then obviously with the most recent, with the killing of George Floyd, and I just happened to probably about 2 or 3 weeks before, someone had mentioned to me this prayer call that was going on, Foundation Hall University. It grew out of the Pupil of the Eye conference that Barbara Talley and a bunch of amazing human beings had pulled together to serve as a source of strength and upliftment for African American Baha'is. And thankfully, I had started getting on this prayer call. This was 2 months after COVID hit, and just every day. I don't know. Again, they were a key piece of my own education as well as my ability to make it through this very challenging time. And it became, you asked earlier about, listening. And for me, this was probably, it's kind of ashamed and embarrassed to say that it took me this long to really, really, really listen But these calls and this study after the prayers that we would do was a period of deep listening for me. I filled notebooks up of reflections, and as I heard the pain and the anger and the frustration and the hope and the and the joy and all of it pouring out from folks on these calls, it really elevated my own engagement, as well as deepened my profound appreciation for the spiritual dynamics that are going on in the country, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I'm wondering if you could maybe, as some final thoughts before we open it up to the friends for questions. You know, I wrestle a lot with this, with the writings in terms of when Shoghi Effendi says that it's going to take, you know, a really long time to address the race issue in America. But then he also writes about the urgency. And so through your own experience and, you know, the path that you've taken, I don't know if you have any key learned experiences that could expedite the urgency or help specifically those who self-identify as white in our country understand the urgency of why it's so necessary to work and also achieve race unity and, you know, ultimately the most great peace. And so I don't know if you have any final thoughts thinking about that.
Yeah, I guess for me it relates to sort of the experience of the friendship that I developed with Jeffrey, where I learned just the true depth of companionship at which is available to us to relate from. And when you love people deeply at that level who are hurting, it lights a fire under you in a way that I think, again, my own understanding of my journey was that the bulk of it really, I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of it either, because, you know, I am grateful for all I've learned. That, you know, I mean, I get motivated to do the work that I do on myself and for my community in honor of all these beautiful souls that I just showed you pictures of, who have gifted me with, you know, their love and insight as a way to honor them. But the bulk of that work, you know, has been, I don't want to dismiss it that way, but in some ways largely superficial, if I can be honest. That's not actually true, you know, but what's going on right now, you know, for me, you know, and I think James Baldwin talks about this a lot in The Fire Next Time. These threshold moments that I've experienced personally, I feel, I believe in my heart, you know, what Baldwin describes is like, we have those as a community as well, right? And in many ways, I think we all understand that racism is not only an affront to human dignity, but the most anti-Christ, anti-God thing that has ever perpetuated on the planet, right? And it will be undone, right? Because it's against God. It can't last, but it's my own obstinance that kind of keeps it going, right? Like, if I could just get out of the way. And so, and Baldwin with the fire next time, it invokes that notion that, the last time God kind of got really pissed off with the world, he sent a flood, right? wiped us out and started over, kind of, so to speak. Very, very gross paraphrasing of the Bible there. But then it says, it's actually from a spiritual, says, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, not with the water, but the fire next time. And, Baldwin was a minister, very spiritual, very religious in his understanding. And he talks a lot about too, like America has been given these moments, these threshold moments when we could come clean, right, in the eyes of God, and repent and move forward differently. And by and large, we have failed to take advantage of those moments. And so, in many ways, when we talk about the urgency, I feel like, we are in the times of the fire. It will be made clean. It will be made right. And again, ultimately, we each answer to God for how we lived down here. I certainly don't want to go to him with some of my mess. So I'm going to work on it every day, every moment, and spend every hour I have trying to make things right and help other people. And actually, a big part, I didn't get us to speak to it, but a big part of my own journey has been returning to my relationships with white people, because in looking at my life, I realized a lot of my work has been done in kind of running away from the white community, just because I was so ashamed and embarrassed in many ways by our behavior, by our continued obliviousness to how bad it is. And again, I'm very grossly generalizing. Don't take it personally if it doesn't apply to you, but I know it applies to me, so I can say it. And so the most recently has been my own return to the notion that, the work I have to do is in developing taking that same love and nurturance that I received from all these amazing people and paying it forward with members of my white community, because that's where the healing, that's where the stuff needs to get undone. That's where we need to do the unpacking and the healing from this gross propaganda campaign that we've been part of called whiteness. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So friends, we're going to open it up for questions. And I can see, so if you want to raise your hand, you can. I can't see everybody on the screen. Any questions? Oh, Kathy Lee.
Thanks so much, Lee, for sharing your very personal journey of discovery. I'm just really so thankful that you are sharing your moments of learning and vulnerability and your scared parts and your happy parts, the whole thing. It's all wonderful. And I'm particularly moved as a person who's maybe a generation older than you to hear about your roots, your Alabama roots, and how your mother had to wrestle with that. And that possibly was one of the major contributing factors in your own quest and search for justice. I was astonished that she stood up to her parents.
Yeah.
And I thought that is often where it begins, in one's family. To take a look at what we have inherited, the falsehoods, the lies, the propaganda, and how we can be different in guiding the next generation. So I guess my question is, since your mother influenced you, how conscious have you been in your journey as a parent with your daughters?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I, for me, a big part of it, let's see if I can find, this. So here, I really strived to have, I don't know if you can see it. This is sort of, I was struck in the Baha'i writings about this notion, this sort of policy of preference, right? And that is, in Baha'i elections, if there's a tie, the tie is broken in the favor of the minority, right? Which for me, it seems like a fairly, again, I'm a political scientist, so elections, I probably find them more interesting than most. But I found this, fairly simple political procedure to be very profound in meaning for me. So I thought, if Baha'u'llah would institute this notion of preference in this situation, then surely, it's a powerful thing. So I really tried as best I could in almost everything we did to show a preference, and to, with my limited time and energy with my daughters and the activities we did, we're going to spend it at the very least in groups of multicultural kids, and we're going to reserve the bulk of our time and resources to serve, to be of service to African Americans, and worked really hard in both large ways, like, with Girl Scout troops and who we invited to be part of our troop, and where we chose to have certain events, as well as who we surrounded the kids with as family. And here's one of my favorite photos of Becky and Faith when she was one. Actually, it was when Becky was living in Birmingham, and we went down to visit. He was her godfather, and just wanted as much as possible for them to grow up feeling nothing but love and beauty, appreciation for the beauty of African American folks in particular, just knowing that they were going to get so much of the other message in social programming, and so that was very important to me. I spent a lot of time and my journey doing that.
Thank you, Lee. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I saw Janae's hand up, and then
Yeah.
Chuck.
Thank you, Liz. Lee, thank you so much for the sharing that you did. I sent you a little private note too. You know, your vulnerability, your honesty was incredible. I'm struck by a couple of things, but one in particular. You know how we have these what they call earworms. When we hear a jingle or something and it gets stuck in our head, and you were referring to that situation after all the work that you had been doing outwardly and inwardly on yourself, that you realize that you still have those tapes that play. And often, this is a generalization, white folks get stuck on the guilt and don't seem to really get beyond that. And what I've been impressed with you is that you continue to work and you're brave enough to push past any guilt. How do you do that? And what can you share with others to help them with that? The other thing that I'm struck with is the journey that you've been on parallels a path that, you know, we as African Americans go through. It's an everyday thing. And you seem like you have made peace with the fact that you do have to work on it every day. But how do you deal with pushing past the guilt?
Well, I guess for me, is kind of related in the sense that, you know, knowing that it's an everyday thing, right? Knowing that this is just how I'm going to live my life, right? I'm gonna struggle with this darn near every moment of every day. Is an opportunity, and I guess two things. One is, as I began to know more and more, and as I began to love more and more, the recognition that, you know, whatever discomfort or guilt or pain I might be feeling because I'm wrestling with my programming, my actions sometimes, you know, having to confront stuff I did that was like, that was really bad. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? You know, that sort of daily reflection of, you know, bringing myself to account each day, that as challenging, as difficult that might seem, you know, and it gets hard. But it can in no way compare, right, to the level of just pain and disregard and violence and injustice that, you know, that the majority of the world experiences at the hands of people who look like me. It can never in any way compare. So, you know, I feel that kind of drives me, you know, I mean, I and especially again, you know, in honor, I mean, I feel like the moments of risk that these beautiful, you know, Black souls took in investing emotional time and energy into me when I probably, you know, didn't deserve it. You know, I have to pay that back. I owe it to them, to do everything I can, because they gave of themselves for me.
Thank you, Lee. I see Dawn and Chuck have their hand up.
Thank you. I know Dawn may have something to say, but Lee, thank you so much. I'm deeply moved, and I'm just honored to accompany you, to stand in your shadow as you do this work. It means a lot to me to hear. And we haven't interacted a lot over these 30 years that since I first met you, we haven't really. But I'm so pleased, I'm so happy to know that we've been doing the work in our own ways.
Well, you and your relationship and your work,
Ah,
sorry, with Bob James was a huge part when I, again, I couldn't speak to everything, but when I first became a Baha'i, it was challenging,
mhm.
right? Coming
Yeah.
from the level of activism and awareness that I had to, and thinking about, oh my gosh, I've hit the jackpot. Here's a group of people who believe in oneness.
Mhm. Mhm.
How
Mhm.
awesome are we going to be? And then, had the tests that come through that, but watching and being a recipient of the work that you and Bob did was a huge help for me as
Oh,
well. So not
wow.
not directly, but very, very connected.
Thank you for saying that so much. I appreciate it, and I think of the courage that you're expressing and the vulnerability, as Janae said, that you're expressing is so important. I mean, I think for us as white or whited people, we need to be able to show that kind of vulnerability, to express our lack of knowing, and as you said about these tapes that continue to run. I mean, white supremacy, the doctrine of white supremacy runs deep. We deeply inherited that, and I share that same feelings that you expressed. That doesn't go away. It's a daily effort. And I think I hear in what you're saying that we know that the consequences of not doing anything is a negation of our faith.
Mm.
The consequences of not dealing with the toxic whiteness within us is the negation of our faith. So I appreciate that so much. And I wanted to ask you, because Dawn and I were chatting a little bit here. She often says to me that I don't have any white friends, and and you said something about that. Now that's not absolutely true. There are people on the call here that I would call dear friends and close in this work. But I wonder, how do you think, and what are you doing to kind of reconnect with whites and trying to find a way to help our fellow white folks, whether they're Baha'is or not, to kind of come to a new awareness about their indoctrination and
Mm-hmm.
oneness.
Well, I had a profound experience that helped guide me. Let's see, where is it? Yes. So some of you may know Adelia Ellis. She used to live here in the Triangle, and she lives down in South Carolina now. When she was up here, we had lots of conversations around this issue, always, and trying to find, what can we do? And God bless her, during COVID and, following the murder of George Floyd, it came to her in a dream to offer this our moral imperative kind of, I can't call it a training, it is really a space for white people to come together and unpack some of this stuff, as well as support each other and challenge each other in our relationships with our family and our friends, our white friends, and give us some guidance and tools for how we can have those conversations. So growing out of that, I found myself having a lot more conversations, mostly on social media because it was COVID, with white friends, and about the need, unpacking sort of our own miseducation and disinformation, and again, I drew a lot of strength from that, and I can only share with folks. I mean, if you have a chance to go through an experience like that, it's great because it puts you in community and relationship with other white people who are really trying, but who recognize that we have a lot of work to do on ourselves, as well as, you know, the work for the community. It's a great support. And I learned a lot in that process. And it's, you know, so I'm working now locally in Chapel Hill with a small group. We've started a white caucus because, you know, as well, some of you aren't from the area, but Chapel Hill is a very white town. But it prides itself on being a liberal, progressive white town, but it's rough. If you're a person of color, it's rough to live here, and that, you know, we don't make it easy. And so really, you know, taking it from that realm of educating myself, as well as, you know, just working intimately with friends, to then also striving to do that, you know, at the level of community. Like how do we understand how whiteness operates in Chapel Hill, and what can we do about it? Because clearly, you know, I mean, we have people who care, and and people who don't want to see it be as bad as it is. So why do we not seem to be able to make any progress? I don't know. That's a long answer, but you know, I recognized again that's my work to do, and that if I'm not reaching out to the white folks at Chapel Hill and inviting them to move forward differently, then it, you know, like Liz was saying, it just protracts it. It's going to draw. It doesn't have, you know, the talk about the urgency, you know, at the same time we know that things evolve and grow, but like the conversation I had the other day was, you know, this notion of incremental sort of evolutionary change. It's a very white concept, because like, it's okay. I can deal with incremental evolutionary change, you know, maybe emotionally, I wish it weren't so, but it really doesn't affect me personally if it's slow change, but it affects other people. Like life and death affects them if it's slow. And so Baha'u'llah also says, you know, we have like that analogy of the 7 valleys and that notion of spiritual growth. But Baha'u'llah says you can traverse those valleys in the blink of an eye. So that tells me it doesn't have to be slow, painful, incremental growth. So yeah, that's another big inspiration. It's like, how can we blink of an eye this a little more?
No, and it reminds me of the quote, and I don't have it here, but Shoghi Effendi talks about this revolutionary change. I think it is Shoghi Effendi, please correct me if I'm wrong. And to really think about, well, what is a spiritual revolutionary change? What can that look like? And how are we holding things back? Because for me, you know, this idea of urgency is real. It's real. And, you know, historically, liberalism has focused on incremental change that continues to impact differentially people. So.
Well, I really feel like this last 2 years, I've been on like a crash course of intense growth and learning, you know, and in many ways, you know, I saw in myself that own, you know, sort of the warning that Dr. King issued about the liberal white person. Like, gosh, you know, that I saw that in myself, and it was not pleasant to see. So, you know, all you can do is move forward today differently, and you know, again, we have that process, right, of reflecting at the end of each day and calling ourselves to account, and starting each morning prayerfully to live differently today, you know, and just, you know, please God, let my life look different, let my behaviors be different. And it's that daily fight, you know, that like every little opportunity you have to take action, or to, for any offer, I find myself, a huge help has been like stopping and thinking, like, what does my intuition tell me to do in this case? And then saying, okay, let me do not that. Like, so whatever I've been trained to, like, oh, here's this, person begging on the street corner, and my programming says, oh, don't give them money, blah, blah, blah. Then I have to say, well, let me do not that. Let me give them all the cash I have in my wallet instead. Let's do that. This is clearly, I need to do something different.
Wow, thank you. I saw Mr. Ndele, you had your hand up. Do you still want to ask a question?
No, thank you. I raised my hand and then Lee answered the question. Thank you, Lee. That's a very inspiring talk.
There.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, friends, I know we're going to start wrapping up and ending, and I think this is a great place to stop. So unless you have any, really earth-shaking question that you want to ask right now, I'm wondering if we can maybe share a closing prayer.
And I can offer too, like if folks have questions, I talked to a friend of mine who makes t-shirts, and she's going to be making some t-shirts for me I want to sort of see what happens when I wear them around town, but it's going to say, I'm a recovering racist, ask me about it. Right. And so I invite folks, like, if you have questions, hopefully, again, I'm willing to share very openly and honestly, and if you have questions at all, but maybe you're not quite sure you want to ask them in a large group setting, I'm always willing to talk to folks about my own learning discomfort challenges.
Lee, would you mind putting your information in the chat box for friends
Oh, okay.
if they want to contact you?